16, verses 19 through 31. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus, in like manner, evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
The parable that Jesus tells is a very challenging parable. And we're tempted, I think, to sort of gloss over it. It's challenging because it has several layers to it. A lot of Jesus' parables are very simple and short. Some are rather long and involved. This is one of the longer, more involved parables. But the simple and short ones, it's really easy to sort of get in them and get out of them and sort of in your mind say, well, this sort of makes some sense, or this doesn't make sense, or whatever, we're going to move on. But this parable sort of gets a hold of us right away and then asks us to consider a number of things. Right off the bat, you get the story of this wealthy fellow who has more than he ever will ever expend in his lifetime. And outside of his gates, where he lives, is this poor man named Lazarus who has nothing. He's sick, he's poor, he's hungry, the dogs lick his sores. Jesus is very graphic in his description. It sort of makes us a little uncomfortable. And immediately you get this whole sense that something is not quite right here. Someone who has much but does not share. Someone who has nothing and is just barely hanging on. And this goes on for a period of time. And so we are sorely tempted, I suppose, to talk about how insensitive the rich guy is, how needy the poor guy, Lazarus, is. We're sorely tempted to let the rich guy have it and feel really sad and pity for Lazarus. And there would be some justification in doing this because it is sort of an appalling story. I remember when I was in college reading about an event that took place in 1964 in the Queens, where a young woman, a 24-year-old woman, had gotten off the bus after working late and was walking to her apartment, and she was attacked by a man with a knife. And she let out a scream. And he attacked again, and she let out another scream, and she ran. And anyways, over a course of 30 minutes, They estimate that over 30 people that lived in the apartments around there turned on their lights and watched this whole thing unfold. And she managed to get away and fight away, and then he would come up and catch her, and this went back and forth for half an hour. And finally he had managed to murder her. And the next day when the police came and started knocking on doors, 30 different people watched this whole thing unfold, and they were asked, why didn't you call the police? And every one of them said, didn't want to get involved. Didn't know, wasn't my business. And I remember just how sad that was. How sad that was. And how angry and indignant I and everybody else who studied that incident in class were about these people who just looked the other way. And clearly the rich man looks the other way every time he passes by Lazarus. But just about the time we're ready to get indignant and want to lecture people like that, Jesus throws this curve. He said, Lazarus dies. And he goes to be with Abraham, under Abraham's care, under Abraham's love and support. And then Jesus says, the rich man died too, and was buried. And so we're getting a sense, for those of us who feel indignant about these injustices, a sense of, oh, this is okay. The rich man got his, and Lazarus got his. Each getting what they deserved. But then Jesus pushes us a little farther by unfolding this whole story when the rich man is aware that he is in Hades. Now, Hades, in the Greek culture, that was very prevalent, was a word that was used to describe absolute despair, emptiness, extreme depression. And so often we find in New Testament the place without God is the place of absolute despair, emptiness, extreme depression. Many in the church, throughout the church's history, have identified Hades as Jesus' understanding of hell, being so utterly separated from God that all that is left is despair, emptiness, an extreme sense of depression. And so in death, the rich man recognizes that he is in a place where God is not. And he feels tormented. And he feels anxious. And he cries out to Abraham, Abraham, and he sees Lazarus there. For the first time, he actually sees this guy who's laying out beside his house. And says, Abraham, send Lazarus to give me something cool, a cool taste of water to at least make me feel better. And Abraham says, can't do it. There's this chasm between us and you, and it's just not possible to cross. And then the rich man surprises by saying, well then will you send Lazarus to tell my brothers that they don't make the same mistake I do? And for the first time in this parable, we get a hint that the rich man has a measure of compassion for somebody other than himself. A thin reed of compassion for his brother. A thin, thin reed. And Abraham says, well, listen, what makes you think they're going to listen to Lazarus? You didn't listen to Moses and the prophets. You didn't listen to this great tradition that you were raised in. You were oblivious to it. What makes you think they won't be oblivious to it? And so the rich man seems condemned to this place of extreme emptiness, despair, alienation, absence of God. What is it about this character that makes his destiny so hopeless? Is it his greed? Is it his wealth? I tend to think it's something entirely different. I think it's his absolute lack of curiosity in what's going on in this guy who's laying down by the road outside his house. That Jesus, in his own way, is trying to help us understand that the posture of living our life faithfully, in part, depends upon a curiosity in each other. Now notice I said curiosity, I didn't say nosiness. You can be curious about what's going on with your neighbor without wanting to get all the good juicy stuff. Without getting all the gory details. I read an essay this week about a woman whose sister committed suicide. And she was trying to deal with the pain of this suicide. And she said one of the most difficult things in helping her deal with the pain of her sister's suicide was all these people that she knew coming up to her and asking her, how did she die? How did she do? Wanting all the details. I don't think that's curiosity. I think it's just being nosy. It's not allowing people their space, their dignity. But being curious, asking her how she's doing with the grief, that's not being nosy. Wanting to sit with her in her pain, that's not being nosy. It is being curious. When we're curious about one another, we begin to express a sense that we see one another. That the other matters to us. And if you don't think you matter, and someone comes alongside of you and puts their arm around you and asks how things going and so on and so forth, all of a sudden you get a hint that, by golly, maybe you do. And so this rich man who ignored Lazarus right outside his house, I think his sin was his absolute lack of curiosity. His willingness to see that other people matter. which gets us back to his request that Lazarus be sent to warn the brothers. He's expanding the arena of what matters, but not by much. And until the rich man can come to the place where he's willing to expand the question of what and who matters very generously, he will be in Hades for a very long time. This last week has been a very difficult week for our nation because of what's happened in Tulsa and what's happened in Charlotte. And the protests in Charlotte, we watched two different police forces deal with two shootings in two entirely different ways. Tulsa remained pretty quiet. Charlotte remained troubled. You turn on the 24/7 news channels and you see endless commentary on both sides of the issue. And there is this temptation that I think we all have to simplify complex problems into just black and white answers, right and wrong answers. And so I've heard my share of people talk about how violent black people are and how difficult it is for police to manage them. I've heard this. There is just something inherently violent about those people. I've heard this. And then I've heard people say they just don't have any respect for police. I've heard this. And I think about that, and I think about police officers, the police officers I've had the privilege of knowing, and I understand that when a police officer pulls over a car and he has to get out of his vehicle, or she has to get out of her vehicle and walk over to the car, he or she has no idea what they're going to get into. It takes real guts to do that. And that needs to be honored. That really needs to be honored. And I understand that when a police officer gets called to a domestic disturbance in a house, and he's walking or she's walking down the sidewalk to the door, ring the doorbell, that person has no idea what they're going to get into. And everything I read said domestic disputes are the most dangerous to handle. And I understand that a police officer has to face incredibly dangerous situations. And I've heard those conversations too. And then I heard a conversation by an African American who talked about how when his grandfather was 13 in 1939, his father pulled him aside and told him, this is what you need to do to be safe in the presence of police. It's the talk that black males get at the age of 13. The talk. This is what you have to do to be careful. Because there is this presence of an anger in our society that often gets expressed. We call it racism. And then he went on to say that when my dad pulled me aside when I was 13, back in the 1960s, I don't remember the date, and gave me the talk. Whenever you're in the presence of a police officer, you've got to be very careful. You've got to be very careful. Because they will hurt you. The talk. And then he said, when my son was 13, I had to sit down and give him the talk. Generation after generation. Now, I've been blessed in my life with a number of good and healthy relationships with African Americans, and I can tell you from my own personal experience that I don't know a single African American male that has not been pulled over for what they call DWB, driving while black. Doesn't make any difference if they're a bishop, the church, or a superintendent of the church, or a pastor of the church. It just happens. It just happens. And so we have this problem. I keep hearing people say, why does this keep happening over and over and over and over again? And I wonder if part of the reason it's happening over and over and over again is that we have absolutely very little curiosity about each other. We have very little curiosity about each other. We don't take time to learn each other's experience. We don't take time to learn each other's culture. We don't take time. It's easier to hold on to our prejudices and our attitudes. It is. We want people to be right or wrong, black or white, left or right. We don't want to roll up our sleeves and do the work of simply being curious. And Jesus is very, very clear in this parable that curiosity, concern, openness to someone who is radically different situation, different setting, is integral to the health of our spirituality. It's very integral to how our destiny will be shaped. It's very integral. And until we as a nation can take some ownership in being curious about people who come out of different cultures and races and religions, we're going to continue to point fingers at one another. We are. In 1988, I had the privilege of attending a Bible conference at Wittenberg College in Springfield, Ohio. And what was interesting about that conference was there were 3 young women there from the Soviet Union. And the only reason they were there is that in 1988, Gorbachev announced to the whole world that religion will be free. The practice of religion will be free in the Soviet Union. And for the first time since 1924, when Stalin said religious practice would not be free, people in the Soviet Union were allowed to openly practice their faith. And they were allowed to go to places like Wittenberg College and learn about Christianity from this Lutheran tradition and so on and so forth. And there were these 3 young women there. 2 were from Estonia, 1 was from Lithuania. I just so much wanted to get to know them. I wanted to hear their story. I wanted to celebrate with them this newfound freedom. And so I was able to find my way to their lunch table and sit down, and we had this interesting conversation, and I was just really taking it all in. And I said, this must be like breathing fresh air. One of them said, well, our pastor doesn't think so. I said, really? He says, our pastor's scared. Really? Now remember, I'm an American. I love my freedom. I love the ability to get up and say what I want to say and do what I want to do and be who I want to be. I think this is what's great and wonderful about our country. And then this woman looked at me and she says, but you don't understand. Our pastor is afraid that we're going to become just like you Americans. Ow. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you're greedy and materialistic, and you have no soul. And I'm going, wow. How do you surmise that? Well, this is what we've been taught. I said, well, we have Americans that are greedy and materialistic and have no soul. But that's not all of us. You can have freedom and not be greedy, materialistic, and have no soul. But it was one of those moments where I realized that the prejudices I was harboring and the prejudices they were harboring were very real. And the only way they're going to be removed is if we were going to be doing what we were doing at that Bible conference. Being curious about one another. Discovering who and what we really are. Our destiny as a people depend on this curiosity. Our capacity to love one another depends on this curiosity. Our ability to grow in our faith and be what God has called us to be depends in part on this curiosity. And St. Luke has given us this parable that Jesus tells that suggests that if we don't cultivate and have this curiosity, we will find ourselves in a place far removed from a loving, generous God. Not so much because we have been placed there, but because that's where we have put ourselves. So be curious, folks, in a heavenly good way. Love one another. Be the blessing God has called you to be. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.